I'll tell you guys, I had the hardest time trying to play that piece accurately. This bass line and bass feature for the great Jimmie Blanton. It was really hard. I did so many takes of that, and there was a lot of cursing on my part when what seems very simple actually is pretty difficult to pull off. Nonetheless, today we're talking about Jimmie Blanton and this great feature called Jack the Bear from the Duke Ellington Orchestra, recorded in 1940. And the great Paul Thompson, who has a channel here on YouTube that I assume most of you, if not all of you, follow already. His handle is PD Bass, and I'll put a link below to this particular video he did about Jimmie Blanton several years ago. And it's great, just like all his videos. Super accurate, interesting, completely on the ball in every way. He was generally talking about his life, so I did want to maybe look more closely at the music itself in this particular video, and then also mention three things that I don't think that Paul mentioned in his video. Not that he purposely left anything out, but I just have a couple other things to add. The first one is pedantic. Jimmie's nickname is usually spelled Jimmie, J-I-M-M-Y, by everyone, including Duke Ellington. However, according to a couple sources, including one that I really trust, a historian that I really trust, his nickname was actually spelled I-E at the end. So you'll see me, anytime I'm writing Jimmie Blanton, I am writing J-I-M-M-I-E, that is supposed to be his actual nickname from what I understand. The other thing is that Jimmie Blanton was, somewhere along the line, associated with using the side of our index finger for plucking. In other words, perhaps he wasn't, of course, the very first person to do it, but he certainly did it excellently, probably maybe the first time, or at least he had the intention of doing it. And I can't remember where my source is on this. It's somewhere in the past of my discussions with other musicians and teachers and so on, that Jimmie is associated with this style that we use now. He is perhaps the originator of playing like this. And additionally, the other thing I wanted to mention, Paul talked about his influence on other bass players, but there's a really, really direct link between Ray Brown, who is, as you know, is my guy, and Oscar Pettiford as well, who is equally like my hero. Between them and Jimmie Blanton. Ray Brown literally says, quotes, Jimmie Blanton was my favorite. I wanted to sound like Jimmie Blanton. And in a couple of sort of ideas in this particular bass line, you can see where Ray sort of took some stuff from Blanton himself. To speak sort of broadly as well, I think part of what makes this really special is that he is using syncopation in a way that wasn't necessarily used in bass before. And parenthetically, like, everyone sort of understands that the early Jimmie Blanton stuff was special because it brought the bass into sort of an equal footing with the other soloists. It brought it up to the forefront. And he was an excellent soloist and way sort of beyond his time. And so that's true, but what's specific about it is his use of, as I say, this syncopation that isn't even, like you hear the horn players in this particular piece, they're not syncopating that way. They're not swinging that way, which is interesting. And additionally, I think his use of chromatic approaches and sort of enclosures is, again, ahead of its time. And he's 22 years old at this point, you know, which just makes my blood boil, right? Like, wow, how can you be so good? If you know the sad end of the story, he died a year later at 23 from tuberculosis, which is really, really sad. He left behind a lot of great music, including Jack the Bear. wanted to make some notes about this transcription that I have. The first is something that kind of gets, grinds my gears, as they say in The Simpsons, right? That what is accepted online as the transcription for this particular piece in everywhere I've seen generally comes from the same source, and there's even sort of an official one of if you're going to have a big band play this is what, there is a bass transcription, and it is wrong. It is definitely wrong, strongly wrong. If you're going to play this, please play mine. It sounds way more accurate, and it's also reflects the actual harmony that's happening as opposed to the wrong stuff that's going on in that wrong transcription. So that's one thing. The other is that I wanted to talk about sort of the ghost notes that I've written in and the sort of notes that are in parentheses where, because of the audio quality, this is a 1940 recording, I'm missing some things. I tried really, really hard to get as accurate as I could. In certain instances, I had to put, I can't hear if it's the upper octave or the lower. When I was slowing it down, I was putting it to the upper octave, putting a lower, trying to hear what it was. I couldn't quite catch, so I said, you have to make the decision, right? And there's certain ghosted notes that are, indicated by an X note head that are also sort of up for interpretation. There's something percussive happening in those places. That said, 99% of what's here, I feel really strongly about that this is what he's actually playing, and I think it's pretty great. And the chord qualities that I added there too, they're up for interpretation. There's not, to my knowledge, there probably exists charts of this, like in the Smithsonian. There's a lot of Duke Ellington material in the Smithsonian. I have not seen the original charts of this, and the transcribers who have done it before have sort of skirted around being really definitive. Like in general, they'll just put like A flat instead of sort of any kind of chord quality. So I've done my best to sort of imply what I hear and what I think I hear and what I think the intention was. If a chord is in parentheses, that means that either Jimmie is implying something or the overall vibe is implying something. Like there's no chord that actually exists. It's just, there's a couple of this repeated sort of 2-measure thing that he plays with the baritone in unison. That there's no real chord happening there, but it sort of implies a harmony in and of itself. So I wanted to include that so you got a sense of where I think the form is going, right? And what the structure of it is harmonically. So this particular recording, as I said, was in 1940, and in the same session, he also records another feature called Coco. This is Duke Ellington, the famous what they call Blanton Webster band. So Jimmie Blanton is in the band and Ben Webster's in the band, and that sort of revitalizes the sound of Duke Ellington's orchestra when they come in. And Coco is also a very, very strong bass feature. I basically just like this one better, I guess you could say simply. So this is not the first, recordings of Jimmie Blanton that featured him. Famously, there were 2 recordings before this that were duets with Duke Ellington called Plucked Again and Blues. And they're great, and he sounds great. And that was, I think, a year prior. This is maybe 1939. I think, though, part of why these recordings, like Jack the Bear, sticks out is that for the most part, it seems like Jimmie worked out some sort of intonation issues and conceptual issues in that year, and it really shines on this recording. And there'll be more to come. There's very famous duets with Duke that come after this, where he plays Pitter Panther Patter and so on, and Body and Soul with the Bow. There are other great recordings of him. There's a very great recording of a solo on Sepia Panorama from Live at Fargo. This is a recording of the Duke Ellington Orchestra live, just at an actual concert, basically a bootleg from, I believe, 1940 as well. And you could hear the whole band sort of go through their whole thing. It isn't a studio sort of package. It's their whole show. And the bass is surprisingly well recorded by this fan. So you can hear him pretty darn well, and he's playing his butt off. So check that out as well. So looking at the chart itself, I mean, from the very, very beginning on his entrance, it's so strong and so hip, and really it just is sort of the a precursor to bebop. I mean, this is around the beginnings of when sort of bebop is bubbling up, right? And some of this sounds like bebop, and this is a 22-year-old kid who started on violin, who got just whisked away into Duke's band. So great. you wanted to finger it differently. Just that use of the chromatic movement there is different than what had come before as far as in a bass feature. And in the very next bars, we've got this both a little chromatic movement, but into a descending sort of by thirds, descending thirds down the A flat major scale. He does this over and over and over again in this piece. It's simple. It's not terribly like contrary, if you understand what I'm saying. It's not pushing anything that you don't expect to hear. It's not pushing the boundaries of what you expect to hear, but consider the context. This is 1940 from a bass player, right? That's partially what makes this special. And then if we look at bar 9, we have this beginning of the sort of leaning towards the influence of Jimmie on Ray Brown. On the A flat 6 chord here in measure 9, this walking line, that is, yes, a classic walk up and so on and so forth. And I agree that he didn't, I wouldn't imply that he invented it. However, having transcribed a lot of Ray Brown, and as a little sort of shameless plug, if you're not aware, I have a Ray Brown transcription book from Hal Leonard called Ray Brown Legendary Jazz Bassist. And there is a version of Sometimes I'm Happy that is in A flat. And he is playing stuff that is very similar to exactly what Jimmie's playing here. The way that Ray does it in A flat, it just really speaks to the connection between the two to me. And then as you see in measure 17, I wrote in parentheses that he is implying very clearly this B minor 7, or a 2 minor of A flat. The B minor 7 goes to E flat 7 is almost definitely the harmony that's supposed to be happening, perhaps in both those bars. But either Jimmie heard it or somebody else is sort of doing it that I couldn't hear, but he is definitely implying a 2 there, which is not, I don't think, prescribed in the music, which is pretty hip. And then in measure 21, this line that is played in unison with the baritone several times throughout the piece, this one. Right, so I put in some implied harmony there. We're in the key of A flat. So D flat is the 4, yeah, and then D diminished is walking up with E flat in the bass like this. And that is a super cliche normal thing that millions of composers have done. There's nothing necessarily special about that. But again, context, something about this line that Duke wrote, or whoever wrote it, it's probably Duke, something about the line in the context with the fact that this is a 4 and then a sharp 4 going to sort of 5, the 5 in the bass. And this particular melody, in this particular context, reminds me of Oscar Pettiford's Tricketism, which if you're not familiar with, I'd love to talk to you about in another video sometime, but it mirrors sort of some of this movement. That's a little section of it there. So it's in D flat. So, and then, like that is part of the melody, and this sounds so much like this line. As I say, we'll go into Tricketism in another video. But that really speaks to, again, the connection of Ray Brown and Oscar Pettiford, these direct sort of descendants in the lineage from Jimmie Blanton, which is really, really cool. I also want to bring your attention to measure 41 and 43. I'm not exactly sure what the intended harmony is here. My ears are not good enough and I didn't spend enough time at the beginner to figure out exactly what everybody's playing. I believe it's something like a B flat 7 sharp 11, or if you would do sort of a polychord, maybe like E7 over B flat in the bass. But there's something different happening here than what is in the sort of standard transcription. This is a really strong place. In the standard transcription, they have the bass playing an E, which is absolutely not happening. He's definitely playing a B flat there. And so too in measure 43 as well, it's sort of the same idea. There's B flat something over D in the bass. All I wanted to do was bring your attention to the fact that this is a really strong place where, and a really obvious example of many, where the accepted transcription is wrong. So pay attention to this and play exactly what's there. The next thing that I wanted to mention too was, like, if you look in 77, and as you play through this piece, as I hope you will, it's really a workout. Like, you know, as you know, the flat key, A flat, D flat, G flat, you have really very little use of open strings, right? Something about the way that Jimmie is playing this makes me think perhaps he was playing it more in the middle of the neck here, you know, using this A flat, but probably somewhere like this E flat as opposed to there. I have a feeling he was maybe doing this there because some of these shifts are not necessarily awkward, but they start to really take a toll on your strength, your hand strength. So this is a great workout for your hand as well. And there's this line, like, as I say in 77, D flat, D flat, A flat, D flat, B flat, A flat. Like, there's no great way to finger that. Perhaps you could go D flat, B flat there, and then A flat there. That might make sense. I should have done that instead of what I did. I just realized that in the video. There you go, always learning, right? And then also, if you look at this great line that starts at measure 93, this ascending thing, nothing unusual, but again, the use of chromatic approach notes that isn't so common at this time. It sounds normal to us now, but again, put yourself back in 1940, understand what came before. This is different and great. B flat. And then going back, and then this is so hip. He is definitely declaring this is an A flat 7 there. He's playing G flat instead of G natural. And it's kind of interesting, like, this section is ostensibly a blues, this section of the tune, and he doesn't really sort of clearly define that this is an actual dominant chord. But there it's so striking because he hasn't done it before, if that makes sense. So playing again from measure 93, slower than the recording. Do you see what I'm saying? It has this, it sort of all of a sudden leaps out, and it's doubly emphasized by that very slick and simple syncopation that he does, that he's playing on the and of one, which we discussed in some Ray Brown things. And I bet you Ray got some of this type of thing from him as well. I mean, it's just so great that this little bit of syncopation and putting that G flat there, of all places, just like brings this chorus alive. So like going into the main feature part of this that starts at 108, these triplets that he's playing, which I didn't hear when I first transcribed this years ago. I went back and retranscribed it in the past week, and sure enough, there are triplets there, and these are fast. Like, this is, you know, high-level performance on this instrument, right? And he's got a fat sound too. Like, his strings are clearly quite high from the fingerboard, and he's able to, it's pretty fast. That's really impressive, and is a great workout for our hands too. I think it's sort of, when you give this little parameters of having a simple repeating thing that is hip and sort of musical, it gives you a chance to sort of get excited about working on trying to make those triplets sound good, if that makes sense. So at the end of 112, 112 itself sounds like this. 1. Right? So at the end of 112, if you consider the and of 4 there, that E flat going to the A, E flat, A flat, B, C, 4 notes, my finger, 4 notes, 4 notes with my fingers. That's 4 notes. And then that phrase is sort of wrapped inside itself by starting on the and of 2 with a 6-note phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then an 8-note phrase wrapped in on the and of 1. I mean, it's so simple, but really sort of sophisticated, right? Like it's syncopation that's not happening with just leaving space or emphasizing a strange note. It's actually rephrasing something in a way that makes it sound complicated, right? But this is all just the A flat major scale, which is why I was saying I was getting mad earlier, because this is all basically A flat major. Why can't I play some of this stuff, right? So just this idea of not only folding in this melodic and rhythmic phrase in an unexpected place, so it has these sort of interesting folds in the time, but to increase the length of the phrase each time you're doing that. I mean, it may seem simple to some of us and very naturally musical, but again, think about the context. So let's play 112 just one more time so we can hear it a little bit slower. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Man, it's so good. That same idea from many other places in the tune, right? So starting from measure 116, this next phrase is super hip as well, and again, in a deceptive way. The idea is very, very simple, but it sounds more complicated than it is, and it's actually kind of hard because it's a little bit of a tongue twister, so to speak. He is basically approaching notes from the A flat major scale, but from 2 half steps below. So the broad target notes here are F, and then E flat, D flat, C, and then B, E flat, A flat, or A flat, E flat, B, something like that. But basically, that's essentially the idea. He's just descending the A flat major scale, but each note gets approached from below. So that's going to F, D flat, D, E flat, and then this hip triplet thing that goes to D flat, so B, that's from 3 half steps below, B flat, B natural, C, D flat, and then going back to the same 2 notes below, B flat, B, C. Man, I mean, again, like, it'll throw you for a loop. Just please try to play this, right? Like, it looks complicated, it doesn't sound very complicated, and when you're playing it, when you're working it out slowly, you're like, oh yeah, this totally makes sense. I can totally play this. And then when you actually try to play it at tempo, you're like, how did this 22-year-old wonder kid do this, you know? And then this ending phrase that starts at 120. What a very, very cool play on rhythmic phrasing there. To have the presence of mind to be able to, he's doing this chromatic descending idea, but he's sort of not, everything isn't equal. I'm saying he's not playing the same exact pattern as he goes down. He's changing it to fit where he needs to go. So if we play it really slow from 120, 1, 2, 3, 4, So this descending movement, he's A flat, G, G flat, F, E flat, E. Yeah? That's terrible fingering there, right? I'm all going, but that's kind of where your fingers end up if you actually play the other parts. Starting from A flat, E flat, G, D, G flat, D flat, F, C, E, B, E flat, B flat. So he's just playing on that idea, but rearranging the phrasing and the melody, so to speak, in a way that fits all what he wants to do and also gets to where he needs to go. And it's just really like, talk about a tongue twister. Again, please try to play this because, my goodness, as simple or as obvious as it might appear on paper, it's a tricky on your fingers, you know what I mean? Which is a great thing. So do you get the sense of sort of how far ahead he was? In his young life, in his short life, he was able to really push the concept of what the bass can do forward in a way that we're still using today through Oscar Pettiford, through Ray Brown, and the people that came after him. We're still taking some of these ideas, still trying to sound like horns on this hard to play instrument, right? And it's amazing to think that this was in 1940. If only we had been around to see it, I think it would be something to hear live for sure. Thanks for joining me as always. Please be sure to like and subscribe and look for a PDF below. And always remember, straight ahead and strive for tone.